Hello and welcome to Call of Discovery, the KeyForge podcast where we celebrate KeyForge, its community, and the excitement of discovery. It is just me, Zach, today. I've got a very special guest today. We are doing a follow-up to the Ghost Galaxy's competitive play formats. If you have been reading blogs and Discord posts and Twitter posts and listening to podcasts during the time when we're sitting to record this, then you know that Ghost Galaxy announced some competitive organized play formats, which a lot of people, myself included, had some strong reactions to, and a lot of people had to sit and think. Some people still didn't like it. Some people started to change their minds. And with some feedback, Ghost Galaxy actually responded, gave a whole lot of context for those changes, and then changed their changes a bit. They iterated on them in a way to answer some feedback from the community. So all of this is happening relatively quick, a pretty fast news cycle for a bunch of passionate KeyForge podcasters and bloggers that we have out here in the KeyForge media sphere. And this is a follow-up episode where we're going to be examining things in the context of this second blog post with a lot more context. But we've got a really exciting angle today. Not really an angle, a really exciting person, actually. Coming back into the KeyForge media sphere proper, we get to interview Jake Frydman. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. Really excited to be here. Honestly, just a total treat to get to talk to you today, Zach. And the first thing I want to do is just give you a belated congratulations on 100 episodes. This is amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, we appreciate it. I truly learned what high effort content was trying to produce a musical episode, but we got through it. Oh, man. I may or may not have one or two other drafts of very silly KeyForge songs, but that'll have to wait until the KeyForge news cycle slows down, I think. Until there's a little less pure excitement. But very excited, Jake, to have you on here. Listener, you likely very much recognize Jake's name and voice from Sanctumonius, KeyForge podcast since sunsetted that ran for a year and a half, 53 episodes, a whole bunch of downloads. And of course, if you're a really dedicated board game fan, you probably haven't stopped listening to Jake's voice. Jake is currently a host of Decision Space, the podcast about decisions and games, alongside his co-host and a board game designer, Brendan Hansen, which is a lot of fun. Shout out to Enchanted Plumes, one of Brendan's games that is a family favorite here in my house. We adore it. Decision Space has 89 episodes out, a pretty sweet Patreon setup. And at the time of their release, at the time of we're releasing this episode, Jake, you and Brendan have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier of Stegmaier Games 3 times on your podcast at this point, which is fantastic. And if you recognize that name, that's because you may have played Wingspan or Scythe or Viticulture or many of the other games Jamie's company has published. So if you haven't listened to Decision Space, 1, Jake will probably forgive you. 2, you can go do that once you're done with this one.
Well, thank you so much. That's a really kind introduction. And I want to also say that I'm Zach. I'm just such a big fan of you. And I've sort of been away from the KeyForge space for a while, but never away from your face popping up in my Twitter feed with your reaction gifts or whatever else. So it's just awesome that you've been such a steadfast figure here in the KeyForge media landscape, as you put it. And again, just thanks so much for having me on. It's really a treat.
Of course. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Not many people can escape my face on Twitter, even though they've tried. Indeed. Yeah. So Jake, you mentioned you hadn't been in the KeyForge space quite as much, and of course you're back because you're back to talk at the very least because there's some big KeyForge news. So why don't you walk us through what was going on with you when you heard the KeyForge news and why you've kind of started to re-engage with KeyForge, and then we can talk about all the news itself.
Sure, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, where to start? So I guess while I've been, less active in the KeyForge scene, I've never been entirely away from the game. I picked up a box of Dark Tidings when that came out, and organized a little sealed night with that with my friends. It's something I've played with my wife a little bit during the hiatus, and recently was able to score a couple of boxes of $1 decks whenever that happens. That was
Right.
incredible.
That was a good deal.
that was nice. And then I've also done a couple of, I think they were called like Cote or like Coty. You know what I'm talking about? Like
KeyForge online team events.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was playing with some locals
nice.
to the larger St. Louis area for Team Rocket boots. So
a favorite card of mine, so I dig it.
Right. So I've been doing, still invest in KeyForge, and if people have, listened to the podcast Decision Space, we did a review of the game where I made very clear that it's still one of my all-time favorite board games, and something I've really been advocating for people who are board gamers first to really give time of day to this game, which I just think is one of the best game designs period ever. So that's sort of what I've been up to generally with KeyForge. So of course, when I heard about the acquisition of KeyForge, that we might be getting new cards once again, that it was kickstarted on GameFound, I was all on board with, and just generally excited to have new cards, new fun experiences with the game, but more from the perspective of just like a more casual sort of enjoyer of the game than someone who, feels like in the past I would have like considered myself a competitive player, right? Like I was playing in like vault tours, traveling some distance to play in events. And I think like my mindset now is like, this is a great game. I love to play it casually. But I don't know that I would still kind of consider myself as someone who's like competitive focused first. Which I think colors sort of my opinions and takes on the more recent news, which we're going to get into now. So I think maybe that's important context for people listening to this, sort of where I'm entering the conversation from.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I have that's such a good perspective as a board game person who knows, what you enjoy in board games. You talk board game theory constantly. Still loving and enjoying KeyForge, and now coming at it from the perspective of most people who will be playing KeyForge. Of course, a competitive scene and the competitive players are certainly an important core of a game like this. But the people who go to a vault tour that ends up within an hour or two drive of them just because they think they'll enjoy it, and they go to the league nights because it's fun, but then they go home and, do work their second job or take care of their family or something. The KeyForge will be different things to different people. So I think it's really important for people like me to remember that, who really KeyForge has been my I just get blinders to everything else. I go, KeyForge, and then I have to remember to feed myself
right.
sometimes. So.
Yeah, that is an important part of being a KeyForge playing human.
A human being the most important part of that, with KeyForge playing secondary there. Yeah. So my goodness, I think the competitive formats announcement came out probably just about a week ago, maybe 6 days ago, at this point. And when you heard about it and read it, Jake, what was the biggest thing that stood out to you when you read through that and just processed that post?
Yeah. So my very first reaction was just general excitement. And I think the excitement was less like tied to the specific formats, but just excitement that this company that now owns KeyForge, we knew that they were interested in bringing organized play back, but now we're seeing actionable steps that this is really happening. And I think just that, in sort of its abstract, like, hey, organized play for this game I really like, an activity I really liked engaging in the past, is coming back. That to me is just like blanket exciting news. So of course I turn to the Sanctumonius Time Shapers Discord, which is a place that I know that people are going to be talking about this, and
Right.
like I want to see other opinions on this, and I click in there, and it's just like the community gif of the
Walking with
guy
the
walking
pizza.
yeah, everything's on fire, and it's just like people are having like a total
Ugh.
meltdown, and understandably so. I guess I want to say, like, preface any of my takes or opinions on all this, which is that I don't think there's like a right or a wrong way to perceive this news. If people
Right.
are
Sure.
upset about that initial uh organized play news update, or are still upset about the second one that we're going to get into, I think that is totally valid, and you're not wrong for that, even if I don't necessarily share that.
Mm.
So then I sort of like had to like start reading through comments and understand, try to understand like where folks are coming from, like why this was so upsetting to so many people. And I think it's clear to me that the vast majority of people uh, who are part of this like core group of current KeyForge players, right? The people that
Mm.
have been dedicating time and energy to playing KeyForge, developing community events, developing community during the entire hiatus.
Yeah.
Largely, we're not big fans, and not everyone, but by and large, we're really critical of that response. So I think that was something to take serious.
Yeah. And I, my opinions and feelings are developing because I'm a human learning new information and sleeping on it a few times. But my initial reaction was the same. I just didn't let myself get near a keyboard. I waited a few days, then put the mic in front of me.
Yeah. And right. And I think like, I was pretty clear in a lot of those initial posts and comments, that I was like, I'm not a fan of Alliance constructed, especially as it was originally laid out. That's
Right.
not something that appeals to me. But I was sort of coming at it more from the perspective of like, if you don't like it, don't play it. And I know that's not the end of the argument. A lot of people
Right.
sort of
Sure.
educated me, and it like, explained like, well, from where they're coming from, this has ramifications that affect the entire game. Like, what if, future sets are more designed around this? And I think all those things make sense and are certainly worth considering. So, that sort of did affect my opinion, change my opinion a little bit,
Yeah.
but it wasn't something that struck me originally as like, this is so terrible and fundamentally, changing the game, as much as like this is, a variant that's going to be offered for organized play for people who want to engage in it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That was because that was the core of my reaction too. I said, I don't have to play this, but what if they design cards for Alliance? What if what if we get companions? And that's an MTG reference.
Right.
You can go down that toxicity rabbit hole if you have Google. But yeah. Yes.
So all of that is to say, and I think like and I'm interested to hear your opinion on this too, but like,
Sure.
I think one of the sentiments that I saw a lot was people like expressing sort of feelings of loss, right? Like,
Right.
what about adaptive? What about, survival? What about Tesla and other, formats that like the community has really I guess coalesced around over the hiatus, and even beforehand, as like, these are things we really like about the game and we really like to have in our, competitive play environment, and now they're gone. And I think, again, I'll stop caveating all my statements, but, not to say anyone's wrong to feel that way. But I think I was coming to it more from the perspective of, it's not that these, it's not as though Ghost Galaxy inherited infrastructure of well built out competitive play, right? There's nothing right now besides what the community is doing and what the community can still continue to do. So I think I was looking at the announcement more as like, it's not we're losing this and in place it's this. It's like we're adding this and the alternative is they're nothing, right? Like that's the current state of organized play prior to Ghost Galaxy coming in. So I was
that's right.
Seeing more of like, yeah, this may not be what we want, but it's something. Whereas other people were seeing it as like a big loss of what they had.
Right. Yes, that's true, because I was very much initially in that camp, and I'm still developing my thoughts, which we'll get into a little later. But for me, it was when you're running a company, or even just a podcast for fun, or you're planning things with like your spouse or partner, like having a clear idea of values, goals helps those things succeed, right? And for me, a KeyForge value was unalterable decks. This deck list is locked in. And so for me, that was a value. I made some stupid joke in the last episode about there's two wolves inside of me. One kind of likes Alliance Sealed, and the other says, no, KeyForge decks are unalterable. And so, yeah, what I've been digesting is I reacted with, well, KeyForge decks are unalterable. What does that mean about the value of the game? Is Ghost Galaxy losing sight of what makes the game great? And so that's what I've been processing with all of these multiple announcements, is examining that. And like Christian T. Peterson, he used a metaphor on the second Help from Future Self interview, cracking open the coconut to see what more they can do with KeyForge. And he means by cracking open the coconut, allowing this pod deck building, which really, instead of making, 60 choices like in a 60 card deck in Magic the Gathering or something, you're making 3 choices, right, of house pods. So it's on a different tier there, but yeah, it's just something I have to sit with and think about as they go through their reasoning.
Totally. And I think like even for people who aren't as invested in the game as you, or even me, being a lesser extent, I was just sharing the sort of drama gossip that's been going around with my wife. She's like, what are you doing on your phone, like typing away
so
all
much
these, like all these threads. And so I told her about the update, and this was with the original one, and she was like, that's just not KeyForge, and she's like, I played a handful of games, and like to even like with that frame of reference, it was like, this is something different, something new. And when we're so invested in what this thing is, that's scary. And I completely understand where your reaction is coming from. And I think like for me too, I might be a little bit of an outlier because I was someone who has organized like KeyForge drafts in the past, where we've like taken apart decks as pods and drafted pods and put them together to make decks, and had a great time doing it. So this is years ago, right? Like after Age of Ascension came out was, I think, when I hosted this draft that I'm now referring to. And even then, I remember, like in the comments, people were just like, "This is wrong. You should not be."
Now, I would not go and stop somebody else doing that. Right. For me, it was more the people making KeyForge are saying this, but for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's just important to like keep in mind that like there is some gray area here, right? Like with regard to deck construction in KeyForge, that may be here to stay. It's impossible for us to sit here right now and know what the future will hold. I mean, all the announcements are very clear that they're like rough draft, they're preliminary. And I have no doubt that if nobody is interested in playing Alliance, right, and the numbers are dwarfed at the organized play events for Alliance, that I presume will exist in the future by other formats, that Ghost Galaxy will take that feedback, go back to the drawing board, and try something else. But assuming that Alliance is here to stay, I think like that doesn't mean that KeyForge is Magic the Gathering, right? To your point, like, and like, yes, it is technically deck construction if you open 2 decks in the sealed and put together your deck out of those 6 pods to create the best deck. That is constructed, we could draw a stark line there and say that's wrong, but it certainly feels to me much more like a limited format, right? It feels to me much closer to playing sealed than it does to playing something like Archon Alliance that we've, been talking about. And that is a far cry from, any other constructed competitive card game that I've ever heard of. I guess maybe not Soulforge Fusion. It's pretty close to that.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Right. But like, to me, like if we view Magic the Gathering as one end of the spectrum and, traditional solo Archon KeyForge at the other end, like where is Sealed Alliance on that spectrum? It's way close to the Archon side of things,
right?
In my opinion. And that doesn't mean you have to like it, right? That doesn't mean you can't draw your line at Archon solo or Sealed solo or whatever.
Right.
And that's fine if you do, but like,
yeah,
I think maybe just like I don't want to say like realistic. I guess what I want to say is like, it doesn't mean that we're on a slippery slope that ends at Magic the Gathering.
Right. Yes. I agree. I agree with that for sure. For sure. I know part of my reaction was even with the competitive formats in testing when they presented, without the context we got later, 3 formats, 2 of which did something I considered, unholy,
right?
To go overboard,
morally wrong,
right? That's when I went. Well, wait, is this the future? Like the KeyForge that I know, whether or not I say, okay, I'll play this new stuff. The KeyForge I know is in 1 out of 3 formats.
Yes.
So I think their move, something that gave me the most confidence in them through their response. One of the things, there's a lot of things I really liked about their response. One of the biggest things is that they moved to 4 formats. 2 of them are Archon, just Archon Solo, and Archon Sealed, which is the unaltered deck formats. So you have Archon Solo, where you bring a deck, you play that deck against other people's decks, and somebody wins, and you keep going. And Sealed is the same thing, except you open the deck there. And that is the simplified, the simplified original KeyForge that I know and that's kept me going for years. And then they divided Alliance into Alliance Sealed, which is the cool new Sealed where you can even pod sideboard, and then Alliance Standard, right, with the set limitation and eventually a restricted list. So the optics of the medium being the message, it went from, hey, let's just mix everything up and have 1 out of 3 be OG KeyForge. It went from that to, okay, here's where Alliance lives, here's where Archon lives. They're both distinct. Yes, we're up to 4, and they were even giving really us as players, the people, I know they both have, like Michael Hurley and a few other people have some pods of people they talk to from the community. Don't worry, I'm not one of them, just regular KeyForge player here. But they have some people who said, who really gave feedback on these things. And I know Ghost Galaxy has really wanted to keep their number of competitive formats low. So it's understandable, easy to pick one, easy to find other people to play with. So they even kind of gave a little bit of ground with that feedback to go up to 4, which I really admire.
Yeah. I mean, just in general, I think the second update, like the response to the community was well done. I don't know if it matches kind of the the level of, I don't know, like the first update they sent out, right? It just seemed not well thought out in general, right?
Right. It was very brief, left a lot of room for interpretation, which
and I'm curious too, like what your thoughts are on them changing course. And I would say they're changing course in a very significant way in just 4 days, right? To me, that indicates like that, and this is just speculation.
Sure.
But it indicates to me that like this initial organized play offering was truly a rough draft, right? And not something that had very strategically been put together over a long period of time with lots of testing the formats, right?
Yeah.
I think that was also something I want to give, I guess, airtime to, and I think it's important. Like, one of the things that a lot of folks I was seeing were upset about was this idea that, like, perhaps Ghost Galaxy Gaming knew that people would be really upset by this news, and therefore chose to put that news out after the campaign on the crowdfunding campaign on
Right.
GameFound ended. Um, and like, if that's true, like, that to me is
Yeah.
something that I think, like, people are, rightfully upset about, because people were saying, like, if I knew this, they were going to
Right.
so fundamentally change
Right.
the game, then I wouldn't have backed it. And now I can't cancel my pledge without paying 10% cost. And I think,
Right.
frankly, if Ghost Galaxy Gaming is listening, I think that a lot of people would appreciate just a comment on that.
Right. So there is a comment on that. Jake was kind enough to let us delay this interview by 10 minutes because I was listening to the Help from Future Self episode at double speed so that I could have that information before we recorded. And Christian T. Peterson, now if you choose not to believe him, that's fine. That's your choice. But he said that they had that these competitive formats were exactly really what you said. They started planning them. They had a few ideas, but they started planning them once the GameFound had wrapped up. So I think there was strategic consideration because of the notes about number of new, like how to keep new players from becoming lapsed, how to bring lapsed players back, what were the common pain points among people no longer playing KeyForge. And so that's really Alliance is trying to widen the KeyForge audience base there, right? And he said that they were having all those considerations and published this like really once they had made it and then kind of slept on it, then they put it up. So yeah, they did not have this locked in at the end of the GameFound, according to Christian T. Peterson, who I personally, I believe him. And based on the changes they made where they've retained Archon Sealed and Archon Solo, like I no longer feel like the rug was jiggling under my feet, like I mentioned on the last episode, where they were like, oh, hey, now we're changing the nature of the game, because they went back to say, actually, a full 50% of our formats are going to be OG KeyForge, and here's our new ones, which we believe will serve the game holistically going forward.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you can bring that information. That's new information to me.
Yeah. In your defense, that episode dropped like an hour and a half before we recorded. So.
Perfect. So I mean, good on Christian T. Peterson for commenting on that. I believe him too. And I think like my read on the situation initially, and of course, like hindsight is 2020, but you can go dig up comments. I was saying this in the Sanctumonius Discord, is like, this was thrown together quickly. Like, I think there were clues about that from that first time I glanced at that, right? And the clues were like, hey, this alliance format like doesn't work at all because there are like all these super broken combos, and that was changed right in 4 days. Not that and we could still say, okay, yeah, it's still going to be like way too powerful if with the restricted list. We'll see what that is. Maybe we'll talk more about that, and the fact that you're have to be within the same set, which makes a ton of sense. But like that to me indicated at the time, and even more clearly now, this was not tested at all. And the other big clue, I think, is the fact that like KeyForge Celebration as an event was like announced for like 1 month's time, right? Probably
as soon as they could confirm, okay, we will have Winds of Exchange decks. Go.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, if this was like something that was planned out a long time ago, I think we would have had more heads up about this, like, first big convening that's happening for KeyForge in the new hand. So, I add that just to say, I think like you don't just have to take Ghost Galaxy Games' word for it now. I think there are some like clues in there that actually kind of like back up that line of reasoning.
Yeah, and I think it's indicative of that they are a small, fast-moving, highly mobile company. Mobile in that they can just discuss these decisions with their, handful of employees, whoever they're using as advisors, and then make a decision there based on their goals, based on their values, based on what they know. So the format's coming out in a way that sent people's heads spinning, including mine. I know they didn't want to send heads spinning, but once they included the additional context about saying there's a lot more people who could be playing KeyForge, we think we'll get them with Alliance. It'll help the game get bigger, which is good for everybody. All that reasoning and the changes that they were able to provide so quickly is indicative that they are a small, responsive company, as well as the fact that the blog post went up and they had some unintended reactions, I think, to it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, to me, that is so exciting, and I think
I agree.
All of this is making me more, excited to play and talk about KeyForge than I have been in years. And here I am, right, on a podcast talking about KeyForge again. And I don't think that it's like, we can say that they made a mistake with that first announcement. I think they would agree, right? I think their actions since indicate clearly that they realize they made a mistake and quickly about face to at least begin to address some of those concerns. But like, at least we have a company that's like willing to make a mistake and like try something, right?
Yeah.
And like, when you just think about like when I was doing my podcast, like we just got nothing from
absolutely
Fantasy
nothing.
Flight Games.
Absolutely nothing.
And it was, it was like, because that's such an opposite, right? That's like a huge organization with like tons of bureaucracy. Like there isn't, if they were going to announce a new format, right, or whatever, which I don't think would never happen, really, right? From like what they had in the rule book, like who do you even talk to? Like, do we even know who can like make that decision there?
Right.
Not really. So, I think like there are pros and cons to a small company that's obviously like willing to take risks with this game, and not all of them are going to appeal to everyone. Clearly, not all of them are going to be good decisions. And I think like we can still have a lively debate about whether Alliance Constructed is good for the game. Is it going to really achieve their goals of attracting new players? Yeah. Frankly, I'll be honest, I don't think so. I think that people who want to play a constructed game are going to play Magic the Gathering. I don't think they're going to say like, oh, well, KeyForge is giving me 3 deck building decisions now, so I'm going to like trade in, the 75 that I get over here for that. But like, to me, it's exciting that they're willing to try new things, and the fact that they are clearly responsive, like I don't think I've ever seen, such a, I don't want to like, I don't want to just like be like super Ghost Galaxy Gaming stan here. Like I don't know really that much yet. I think, so like this is not like carte blanche, like every decision they make is going to be good. But the response we got in the most recent update to me feels transparent when I read it.
Yeah.
I like that they are speaking in the same terms that the people who play this game are talking about. Like even the fact that they mention by name like SAS and decks of KeyForge in this is enormous, because like Fantasy Flight wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Does that
everybody freaked out when like Aaron Haltom said the word SAS once on a stream, and they were like, oh my god, they acknowledge it exists.
Yeah, right. Like and here they're like, hey, we have this resource. We're aware of it. There are pros and cons to this existing. Like, does that mean? And I think that just opens the doors to like so many possibly exciting things. Like the fact that you have a company investing in this game, willing to take risks and willing to listen to the community to some extent. We don't really know how big that will ultimately be, like what that will ultimately look like, is an opportunity that KeyForge hasn't had ever before. When it was in Fantasy Flight Games, hands. And I think that us as the KeyForge player base, the community that surrounds us, has a tremendously important role to play now to figure out what it is that we want, to communicate that with them. You know, be critical, but like be constructive in your criticism, because they're taking that into account. And that's not an opportunity we've had before. And I think it could lead to some really exciting things in the future of this game, that we haven't seen before. Like, does that mean that they will acknowledge that the Crucible Online exists? Could that mean that they could,
They-
like do more in the digital play space?
Right. They have acknowledged TCO that it exists and there are ways to play online. And there was confirmation they chatted with the caretaker of TCO. Don't know what that was. It may have just been a thank you for keeping this game alive, so we could then take that baton IRL. Like,
right. Yeah. But the fact that like all of these things now, not that they're, like TCO is sort of in like a little bit of a limbo gray area at times in the past, right? And now, it just seems like this is a breath of fresh air to the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should be excited, even as we may be pissed about certain specifics of what has happened to date.
Yeah. I agree with all that. I think if you follow me on Twitter like Jake does, dear listener, it's no secret that I follow Legend Story Studios, who makes Flesh and Blood. Now, I've tried Flesh and Blood, not the game for me. However, I do really enjoy watching what Legend Story Studio does, because they came out onto the scene with a game that attracted a lot of Magic players, other competitive card game players, but they're a small team that's nimble, can respond, and they are answering to the people who purchase their cards and their distributors, not a parent company. Right. And now KeyForge gets that chance with one of board gaming's most experienced and innovative business leaders, Christian T. Peterson. And this is really KeyForge's best chance out of all the things that have, a chance of happening. I think it's KeyForge's best chance at continuing for a long time and thriving. Now, yeah, I agree with you, Jake, in that I don't know that Alliance existing is going to, I don't know if that's going to keep new players. I don't know where the biggest sustainable scope for KeyForge is, right? Because Alliance, they're trying to recapture as many of the lapsed players and continuing new players that would otherwise be lapsed as they can, with like Alliance and a new experience in Alliance Sealed. And honestly, I hope it works with their current new approach and a commitment to like, they're not going to design regular KeyForge decks for Alliance. I think there's a chance it could work. There's a chance it might not, but I know I have plenty of KeyForge to play. And the other thing I have to say, as allergic as I was initially to, especially Alliance Constructed, I keep seeing new Discord channels pop up for Alliance like brewing, right? People are going through their collections. I've gone through my collection to start looking at like, well, what could I build?
I was going to ask you, yeah,
right?
So have you like had that internal conflict and just started asking questions like, well, what if?
Yeah. Yes, that wolf sits in the corner and stares at me glaringly while I kind of scroll through decks of KeyForge and some
right.
other things, and I go, well, what if because I've always been in a bit of a meme sense a fan of the Tesmal lockout, reaping with a Tesmal 3 times, but they're algorithmically limited to only show up twice. So your solution is something like a Rocket Boots or Brainstem Antenna, but it was always a meme. There was no deck that could consistently have its out be the Tesmal lockout. And now I'm sitting here with a collection of, if somebody has more than 8 Rocket Tesmal decks, let me know, but I don't know of somebody who owns more. Half of them were sent to me for free because they were deemed not viable. And now I have the biggest resource of Tesmal decks for pods out of anybody I'm currently aware of, which as a jank player, when I played Netrunner, Android Netrunner, I'm like, maybe there is something I can enjoy in Alliance. Now, I say that being of two minds, where I'm like, I really don't think that's for me. But then I find myself starting to deck build a little bit. So I don't have like a final opinion on it. I just have to see what happens.
I did the same thing. I was like, I'm not interested in Alliance Constructed at all. But let me go through my list and just, and I haven't like built any actual physical decks out or whatever, but just like the process of looking through my collection of decks and seeing like what maybe I could put together. I had fun doing that. And even if I never play with those at all, like that is just a hint, right? Just a little drizzle of value on these old decks that otherwise have zero value to me. I think Alliance is a cool idea. I should say I love it for sealed. I'm like firmly
sure.
I'm all aboard that. I mean, it's annoying in the past, like, I drove to Columbus and I played in the Origins Vault Tour and got 3 just like objectively terrible decks. Like, I'm never gonna I'm never gonna win that event, which is fine. There's always going to be some luck in it, and there will be the same in Alliance Sealed, but like I think it does like even the playing field a little bit. And even if like the top end is still going to be, somebody's going to get really some crazy variance and just get something insane, I think like it reduces the negative player experience possible of just like opening like something that's like objectively not playable in that kind of competitive environment.
I agree. It moves that floor up of the negative play experience. At the very least, if you do badly, at least you have room to blame yourself now.
Right.
Well, more than you did. You have more room to blame yourself than you did, right?
Some people may not like that aspect, actually.
Right. That's true. But that top end of opening something bonkers was always there, but now each person actually has more of a chance to create something bonkers in a highly limited environment between 2 decks. Because heck, I mean, Confage Lady General of the Keep, Nathan Starwalt's signature deck was his sealed deck at Vault Tour Richmond, and he wiped the floor with that deck, and now it's like, among the KeyForge diehards, that's like legend status. It's legend status. And so now everybody has a slightly higher chance to do that themselves, and then you have an amazing first draft of a Alliance deck, Winds of Exchange going forward, within that set, if you open 2 that are totally awesome together.
Totally.
Anyway,
and I think so. And my take now on Alliance Constructed moving forward, now they've changed it to, in this updated announcement, that your Alliance deck must have 3 pods from the same set. And we also know there was going to be a restricted list of some type, which is super important new information that wasn't included before. We don't know what that looks like yet. And actually, I'm kind of confused when I was reading the update, because it made it seem to me like possibly you could only use 1 card from the restricted list, period.
So
is that your...
Yes. So my understanding is that there will be cards on the restricted list.
It's like library access,
yes,
key abduction, presumably stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And that you can only have 1 of any card from the restricted list, except for cards that there will be like some restrictions on multiples. Like, for instance, let's say Control the Weak makes it. They might put a limit of like 2 or 3. So if your card has Control the Weak, it could have up to 3, but then you couldn't have anything else from the restricted list.
Let's hope for I hope they go to town on this restricted list.
Right. That
what if they made it so that
restrictions breed creativity, right?
Truly. And I think that's like where I've kind of realized I sit with KeyForge, is that like I enjoy games of KeyForge the most when I feel like I'm playing with and against decks that are kind of in the middle of the bell curve, roughly. To me, like that is when whatever like the promise of KeyForge means to you. Like, I think to me, the thing that always first attracted me to the game is like I get to play a competitive dueling card game, and I can just open one deck and play with it and have a fun competitive experience out of the box. And we could debate all day about how much KeyForge today or KeyForge has ever achieved that promise, you know, how much you need to spend to be truly competitive or whatever. But like, I found that like even when I'm playing with an incredibly powerful deck against incredibly powerful decks, that's a lot less interesting from the decision making perspective to me, as when I'm like doing the thing KeyForge as Richard Garfield intended it, with like actual bad cards in my deck too,
Right.
and mostly good cards, but like
Sure.
some that I'm like actively playing around. Like to me, that's like where this game is the most fun. So like if you know something like you know, Edai ends up on the restricted list to a couple of copies, and
Right.
you know, Dave
Sorry,
from
Dave.
Team Rebound can't play his 5 Edai deck anymore. And you know, it's possible. It's not, now that we know this, it's no longer a guarantee that Alliance is just like this super crazy overpowered format. Most likely that's where we'll end up, right? I would guess they're going to be less restrictive than more restrictive in the first draft, but it's now possible that we could actually end up with Alliance being a more balanced format, more middle bell curve than the other. And that was not possible before the update. So I think like my interest in playing Alliance Constructed has moved from like 0% to like, let's see, you know, like the jury is still out for me, you know, and that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that a lot of people just believe that Constructed has no place in KeyForge. But I think just from like the, you know, fun of playing the actual game, I'm more optimistic about it now. I think the last thing I would say about it is like, I think the best place for Alliance in KeyForge is like the equivalent to the commander table for Magic the Gathering. Like, I think it's something that most likely demands a different type of Magic circle to be like thoroughly enjoyable. Right. But like, it makes like that should be the place for the Tesmo lockout decks, right? Like the oddball strategies that you couldn't ever do before, really. And now it's like we have this perfect format for it. You know, the auto cannon bad penny decks, like bring them out,
right.
You know, like let's have some fun, you know, just trying to make oddball strategies work in a casual format. And I think, you know, it has the potential to be a ton of fun in that context, even if ultimately at the highest competitive level it doesn't work. So I'm cool with like the fact that it exists is still something that I don't personally have a problem with, because I think it does just allow us to think differently. And to me, that brings like a fun factor to the game, though I would never want it to be like the way to play KeyForge, right?
Yes.
And I think one thing I've said too is like, ultimately, like the organized play matters a lot for the direction of the game, the development of the game. But it doesn't matter to me personally as much as like what's in the rule book at the end of the day. And I think as long as like their Alliance is listed as like variant and not like this is how KeyForge is played now, then I think we're gonna be in like a pretty safe place with the game moving forward, still being around trying to achieve that original promise of KeyForge as like a competitively balanced, unique deck game.
Right. Yeah. I do like that this is all in service to them working as hard as they can at their goal to make KeyForge as big as it can be. You know, saying can be there because it's still, even with Alliance, won't be for everybody. And they got the game and they said, okay, there's enough for us to get going. This is, you know, their only announced game, and I think their hands are awfully full with it right now.
Does
so
seem that way.
I doubt they're spending too much time on really anything else. Maybe Christian gets half an hour on Fridays to brainstorm other ideas. So they're doing all of this in service to make the game as best it can be. And given the additional context of we're going to design KeyForge decks, you know, as originally intended, with the process of like we designed these unique decks, and then Alliance will be something you can then do with that. So Alliance isn't entering the process earlier. That has given me a lot of, you know, calmed me down a lot. And like, I think a new player playing the deck and going, yeah, I actually love this house pod. And, Alliance exists. So like this still has worth, and helping that be a part of their journey. I think has a chance at success. I'm really not sure about it. But my my small 5-person company in Roseville, Minnesota isn't riding on it. So I can just sit here, be a happy and helpful participant and root them on, right? Root for them.
That is a really good point. Like if you own 3 KeyForge decks, right? And you're not sitting here with just like an embarrassingly large collection of decks gathering dust, then I think Alliance provides even more value to you, right?
Yes.
Now all of a sudden I can reconfigure these to create like, okay, now I put myself in a situation where I'm supposed to do math that's probably pretty easily calculable, but several different matchups as opposed to just having the 3 going back and forth. And like my first experience playing KeyForge, I went to the first pre-release weekend event. I was really excited about it. Played it and thought, you know what, this seems okay. I'm not crazy about it, but I had my 2 decks and I went home and I was like, I'm sort of intrigued. And I did some like solo gold fishing the decks against each other. And the deck that I figured would be better, like lost every time. Yeah. And that is what and then I was like, okay, now I'm interested, right. And I started writing like KeyForge strategy articles, like based on that experience of like, this game, there's a lot more to this game than it first seems. I think a lot of people who try KeyForge never get past that point of being like, there's just not that much here, because obviously there is, we know there is. But, to have a couple of decks and now all of a sudden I can just do like a bunch of different matchups with it and not feel like I'm just like doing something like silly or dumb that doesn't make sense with the game, I think is actually very cool for people who are starting out. Like it might give people, even if it doesn't appeal to people who want deck building or whatever, it might help people get past that first learning hurdle to realize, wow, this game is actually like incredibly skill testing and there's a ton of decisions to make here.
Yeah. I have a friend I play KeyForge with every once in a while, but I see him quite often. He's not playing at our local just because he's got he's in the first year or 2 of an intense job. And he was over earlier today and I had a few unopened Coda decks and I explained Alliance Sealed to him. He's like, and his very first reaction as I explained Alliance Sealed, he went, oh, that's cool. And I said, I've got 4 unopened Coda decks. You want to do some Alliance Seal? He was like, I actually really do. And this is a guy who hasn't been out to locals in months, mostly because of his job. But he went, yeah, that's cool. And even though he opened 2 decks that shared 2 houses, they both had Mars and Dis, and then one had Brobnar, one had Sanctum. He still had double-digit options for the number of decks he could build. Like as he sat down to face me, he had, I think, 10 to 12. Again, math live on the mics, not my strong suit either. He had 10 to 12 options of decks he could build, even though his decks shared 2 houses, which, and I think Chris Steele, husband to Sydney Steele over in Help from Future Self, did the math. If you open 2 decks in Alliance Sealed with the exact same houses, you still have 5 different decks you can build.
Yeah.
There was a highlighted part of the most recent Ghost Galaxy post, dis and formats that also spoke to this. They said, they bolded this. They said it's important to note that every KeyForge deck ever printed is compatible with, Alliance standard. And I went, dang. They just found a way to keep what they consider the spirit of the game, and perhaps I will assent to that because that's not like a moral or ethical value I've held. That's just the wolf inside of me saying you can't change KeyForge decks, right? They're saying let's give all these old collections more value and give people more agency. When they look at a deck, you say, oh, well, that deck wasn't super fun, but man, this one house, let me go see what I can combine it with, and just creating more space for people there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And they also said, which didn't strike me the same way at reading it the first time than it does now after having this conversation with you, that all printed decks are legal in Alliance Constructed, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're not fidgeting with it, you can even break the restricted list, which makes me want to make
yes,
the hot take now that an alliance constructed event will be won by a non-constructed deck.
Right. I love that.
Dave's
caveat.
gonna win it with the 5e dice.
Right. That is honestly, that caveat is in the spirit of KeyForge, I think, even past unalterable decks, right? It's that you could go to an Alliance standard event with an unaltered Archon deck that contains more than one card from the restricted list, because that's the caveat, is if you don't change your deck, you can have as many restricted list cards as you want if it's on the original deck list. And man, the flex it would be to win an Alliance event with an Archon deck. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think it's going to happen. It will
I hope so.
It will depend on the restricted. If it's like 2 cards, then probably not. But
right.
But if they go to town, like I hope they do, then it could totally happen.
Yeah.
So it's exciting, man. I think it's like just such an exciting time to be interested in KeyForge, just interested in board games generally, to see what happens with this. And I guess my like sort of last like appeal to people that are still feeling wronged or upset by this is, I think like the opportunity to make KeyForge at the organized play level or whatever else, the game that you want it to be, has never been higher. And that's just because of how responsive Ghost Galaxy has proven to be. If you want Tesla to be a formal organized play event, the chance of that happening with Fantasy Flight Games was 0. The chance that it happens now with Ghost Galaxy, if you could find the dedicated player base and build support for it, I think it's likely that a community organized format could become a official format, just pending support, right? Like, tell them that you want to play this. See if we can get it incorporated as a side event at the next KeyForge celebration. Pack the house, like get the registration for that side event to double everything else. And like, it could be 4 days after that, like that we're seeing like a new update on their organized play. So, I mean, I think people should be excited. I'm excited. You're not wrong if you're not excited, but I guess I would just urge, like, if anything that's come out of this, like, the keys are that like they're listening. I think that's like the number one most important lesson. And like 2 would be like, maybe take a breath, because this is a responsive team. Like they're shown that they're willing to take risks, but they're also going to listen at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Jake, thank you so much for taking some time to hop on. I saw you had commented in that Sanctumonius Time Shapers Discord. You had some thoughts, and I went, "Aha! I have a podcast."
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is what you were expecting or hoping, but it was truly a pleasure. Always willing to come on, and it's really fun to do a podcast when I'm not the one who has to edit it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's how I get people. As I say, you want to come on? I'll edit. They're like, oh yeah, sure. That's awesome. Especially when they have their own podcast elsewhere. But if people are interested in following you online, or they want to check out Decision Space, where should we point them?
Yeah, I would just say probably the Decision Space podcast. We have a website, decisionspacepodcast.com. Just Google Decision Space wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us. If you're interested in board games or gaming beyond KeyForge, I think you might find something to like. And otherwise, I just hope to see y'all at the next KeyForge event, as long as it's near me,
Right. Yes, I will be at
hopefully more than a month notice next time around.
Right. Yeah. I understand why in their timeline they couldn't do it more, but I have scrounged it together. I will be at KeyForge Celebration, which I'm very excited about.
I hope you have an excellent time. And just been so great talking with you.
I think I will. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jake. I'm going to make sure that all the links that Jake mentioned are in the description. So if you're interested in any of that, I would highly encourage you to jump there. And dear listener, thank you so much for tuning in. This is episode 107 of Call of Discovery. You can find I stream sometimes regularly, sometimes intermittently a SAS climb with a buddy, like Jake said, those middle curve decks, lots of experience with those. We have a blog that happens sometime, just really a couple of different bits of Call of Discovery content there, and the Patreon, if you feel so inclined. And please remember, there's the new player guide, Archon Arcana. Those librarians, arcanists are very active in keeping all that updated. So get that new player guide link, have it on hand for a new player. If you happen to be a new player listening to this very OG KeyForge discussion, then yeah, go there, check it out. This is a great game. And like Jake and I have discussed, I think it's got a bright future, however you choose to engage with it. So, and of course, as always, I will leave you with a question. Have you answered the call of discovery?